This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 15 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayr a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Westford Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, April 11th, 1908, and I will add context as we read along to elaborate on what was happening in Westford 113 years ago. The April 11th issue begins with the About Town section. Of the 150 or more horses stolen in Massachusetts within a year, only 6 have been recovered, according to police statistics. So this industry being safe and profitable, it is spreading in proportion to its safety and profit. With this as a basis, the barn of Fred H. Shorey on the Concord Road, Parkerville, was entered Tuesday evening and a valuable horse stolen. This is the second horse stolen recently in this locality. Constable Boynton was notified and traced the horse as far as Billerica, but lost the trail at that place. As horse thieving is active in the towns toward Boston, it might be well to secure the barn before the thief secures the horse. A petition is passing around for signatures to be presented to county commissioners, asking them to relocate, widen, reconstruct, and tear up the ground generally at Westford Corner, which is the intersection of Nabnasset and Brookside roads, commencing at the Chelmsford line and continuing to Brookside. If plans are carried out as contemplated, it will necessitate relocating tracks of the electric road in some places. Also, the element of widen on the other fellow's land is likely to be solved in the shaking up of plans and boundaries. This is the third petition the citizens of Westford have sent to the county commissioners, asking for improvements on the roads at Graniteville, Westford Center, and Westford Corner. Petitions seem to be contagious, and one is being circulated to be presented to the school committee in remonstrance against closing Stony Brook School and transporting the scholars to the center. That was a result of the building of Frost School, which closed Stony Brook and Parkerville and one or two other of the district schools. The 4th Congressional District will hold its convention at Town Hall Ayr on Saturday, April 18th, for the purpose of nominating 2 delegates to the Chicago Convention. This was the Republican National Convention held in Chicago June 16th to 19th in 1908. Miss Ella Wright of Cleveland, Ohio, who was present at the funeral of her cousin, Mrs. Augusta Butterfield of Ayr, is visiting her aunt, Sarah Richardson, at Brookside. And she would actually inherit the house, which was on Lowell Road, and she would come from Cleveland every summer to spend her summers in Westford. We'll read more about her later. Charles Whitney has bought the milk route of John J. Dunn of West Chelmsford and Brookside. Westford Athletic Association held its annual meeting at Town Hall Monday evening. The meeting was called to order by Edward Fisher, president of the association. The treasurer's report showed all bills paid and $35.40 in the treasury. 3 new members were added: Fred A. Smith, Harry Hartford, and M. L. McGlinchey. Election of officers resulted as follows: President Edward Fisher, Vice President Samuel H. Balch, Secretary William R. Taylor, Treasurer William L. Woods, Directors H. L. Wright, Oscar R. Spaulding, E. A. Hamlin, Henry B. Wright, and C. M. Troll. The old ball grounds at Westford Depot will be used the coming season. At a meeting of the assessors Monday evening at the Selectmen's Room for the purpose of organizing and other preliminary work, S. L. Taylor was elected chairman and J. Willard Fletcher secretary. 2 applications for license to sell intoxicating drinks have been received by the selectmen. These licenses, if granted, will not allow the sale of drink on Sunday on the basis of a sandwich. The selectmen have wisely determined to prohibit the sale of liquor on Sunday. With the close-by towns voting no, there would seem to be business enough in the fluid line without coaxing it along with Sunday sandwiches. On Wednesday evening, April 15th, at 8 o'clock in the Congregational Church, there will be a song and readings recital. Miss Jessie Cohn of Boston will appear in song. Those who have heard her before are glad to hear her some more. Robert Howard Barnum of Boston will make his first appearance here as a reader and entertainer. He has a standing reputation elsewhere in being able to neutralize any tendencies to drowsiness in the audience, and we'll hear more about that recital next week. The warrant is posted for the annual parish meeting of the Unitarian Church to be held at the vestry Saturday evening, April 11th. The warrant contains the usual routine business and is directed to Abile J. Abbott, clerk of the parish, and signed by W.H.H. Burbeck. That's William Henry Harrison Burbeck, and H.V. Hildreth, assessors of First Parish. Death. The oldest woman in town, Mrs. Persis Weston Smith, died at her old homestead on the Concord Road on the evening of April 1st at the advanced age of 95 years. She was a native of Duxbury. Her parents were Daniel Weston and Persis Phillips Cushman. She was a direct descendant of Robert Cushman of Pilgrim fame. In 1836, she married Captain Jacob Smith, who was her father's first mate on a merchant vessel. 4 years later, Captain Smith gave up following the sea and settled on a farm in Westford, where he died 8 years ago. Mrs. Smith is survived by 2 daughters, Miss Clara Smith at the old homestead and Mrs. O.B. Young of Hopedale. Also, 1 granddaughter, Mrs. Gertrude Airy, A-E-R-Y, and 3 great-grandchildren. An only son, Henry G. Smith, was killed on a freight train several years ago where he was employed as brakeman. The funeral took place from the old homestead of Hallett Associations last Saturday and was largely attended by neighbors and friends, some of whom vividly recall the blending association of her useful life in church and town during these nearly 70 years and 10, and its orbit always in the realm of the higher affinities in the life of the town. Reverend B.H. Bailey of the Unitarian Church officiated and brought close choice thoughts gathered from the ripe fruitage of an old age, guided by temperate habits and loyalty to the inspiration of truth, regardless of what horizon it was discovered in. Following this fitting eulogy, Mr. Bailey read with rare taste a poem entitled The Good Old Grandmother. The reference is probably to an anonymous poem of that title found in an old book of funeral services that begins, "Oh, softly waves the silver hair from off the aged brow, that crown of glory worn so long, a fitting crown is now." 2 selections were sung by Mrs. David L. Grieg, Edna Ferguson, and John Grieg, Jr. The bearers were George T. Day, Captain Sherman H. Fletcher, Samuel G. Humiston, William Henry Harrison Burbeck. Burial was in Fairview Cemetery. Thus, the passing away of this life from the town recalls the active life of Captain Smith and his family in the services of the Unitarian Church in its palmy days, when his sweet tenor voice was a more loyal emblem of the return of Sabbath day than even the clock that faces the public in the spire of the church. Theirs is the fragment memory of loyalty. The next section is the Westford Center section. The library is again open after its annual 2 weeks closing. It has received its usual thorough cleaning, and some attractive new books have been added. Among these are 8 volumes from the Library of Home Economics, which will especially commend themselves to housekeepers and homemakers. Another fascinating book is titled Our Trees, compiled by Arthur Emerson of Chelmsford. It is finely illustrated and full of practical and pleasing information. The full title of this book was Our Trees, How to Know Them, Photographs from Nature by Arthur Irving Emerson, with a guide to their recognition at any season of the year, and notes on their characteristics, distribution, and culture by Clarence M. Weed. This book was first published in 1908, which is the year that we're talking about in this podcast, and this popular book went through a number of revised editions and reprintings. The next section is called Accident. Mrs. Homer M. Seavey met with an unfortunate accident at her home last week Thursday evening. With several others gathered around the piano, she was rehearsing some music for a funeral when, in some way, her little son Morton, who was playing about, succeeded in overturning a large kerosene lamp right against his mother. The globe and chimney were shattered to atoms, but with quick presence of mind, Mrs. Seavey succeeded in extinguishing the blazing wick, which prevented further catastrophe. She then realized that she was hurt. The lamp struck her head with much force, causing painful bruises, and the broken globe cut a gash in her face just over the lower lip. Dr. Blaney came and took several stitches in the injury. Unavoidably, this will leave a scar. Morton, affectionately known in the neighborhood as Major, is a sturdy, self-reliant little fellow, not given to causing much trouble, and has been much concerned over his mother's bandaged head and face. The next section is the Westford Grange paragraph. In recent years, big meetings in Westford Grange are not so much of an event as they would have been in its earlier history. On last week, Thursday evening, the first and second degrees were conferred on the spring class of candidates numbering 18. The first degree was conferred by the regular officers of Westford Grange, and the second degree by the men's degree team of Chelmsford Grange. This was the attraction of the evening that all were interested in, and their fine work was thoroughly appreciated and heartily commended for its accuracy, precision, and spirit. A graceful feature was the presenting to the master of Westford Grange by the master of Chelmsford staff a splendid bunch of roses as a token of the fraternal good that has always existed between the two Granges. Worthy Master John B. Wright, although taken by surprise, but always equal to the occasion, responded with gracious felicity. After the work, the evening's adjournment was made to the lower hall, where refreshments of sandwiches, cake, and coffee were served under the direction of Mrs. Millicent Daniels. These meetings were held in Westford Town Hall, which at the time had what they call an upper hall and a lower hall. At the next meeting, April 16th, this class will receive the third and fourth degrees, the third degree being conferred by the ladies' degree staff. Preparations are going on for the usual fourth degree supper. The next section is called Congregational. It's about the Congregational Church, which is now the CPA building. At the Congregational Church Tuesday evening, Professor A.H. Pearson of Oberlin, Ohio, gave a stereopticon lecture entitled Yankee and Turk, or Americans Abroad, to a good audience, including many of the school children. I'll just add that Reverend Arthur Hayden Pearson was professor at Oberlin College in 1908, and he graduated from Harvard Theological Seminary in 1880, and then taught for 20 years at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. He was a member of the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions and probably served as a missionary in Turkey. He was born in Haverhill, Mass., and may have been visiting family here or there in 1908. His talk was sponsored by the American Board of Missions and was also given in Fitchburg on April 10th, per the Fitchburg Daily Sentinel of April 9th, 1908, page 4. He later returned to Northfield, where he died. I might add that I was born and raised in Oberlin, Ohio, and was quite surprised to see a reference to my hometown in the Westford Wardsman. Last Sunday, Mr. Charles Marshall preached at Concord Junction, morning and evening, and his home pulpit at the Congregational Church was occupied by Reverend Mr. Roble of Andover Seminary. The new stereopticon recently purchased by the church, will be used Sunday evening when Mr. Marshall will give a stereopticon sermon in the auditorium, subject The Good Shepherd. The subject of the morning will be The Glorious Life. The late Mrs. Augusta Butterfield's membership in this church was of long standing, covering a period of nearly 60 years, and through all the changes of her life, she cherished a loyal love and interest for the welfare of the church she joined in young womanhood. The Tadmuk Club met under the usual pleasant conditions at Library Hall Tuesday afternoon. It was the third and last in the series under the direction of the Philanthropy Committee. The subject of the afternoon was prisons. Miss Ella Hildreth, chairman. Miss Hildreth gave an interesting and well-prepared paper on the subject, emphasizing the changes from the prisons of earlier times, where the ideas were of punishment only, to the modern institutions, where the aim is to correct the lives of the imprisoned. Mrs. George T. Day gave a group of current events in her usual interesting way. The president, Miss Loker, appointed a nominating committee to choose officers for the coming year as follows: Mrs. George T. Day, Miss Carrie Atwood, Mrs. Henry B. Hall, Mrs. Charles L. Hildreth, and Mrs. C.H. Fletcher. Miss Loker referred with loving sympathy to those members of the club, Mrs. Whitney and Mrs. Smith, who had met bereavement in their homes since the last meeting. The next section is the Graniteville Section. Charles Gagnon, while helping his brother Jerry and his nephew Henry Gagnon in getting out lumber near the Sullivan place in West Graniteville last Tuesday morning, fell from a tree a distance of 30 feet, breaking his right leg in 2 places. Dr. W.H. Sherman was called and had him conveyed to St. John's Hospital in Lowell. He is now resting as comfortably as can be expected. The Ladies' Aid Society of the Methodist Church met with Mrs. Lucy A. Blood Thursday afternoon. The local baseball club will have to get together pretty soon, or the Forge Village boys will outstrip them. Already the team from Forge has been organized, and John Spinner, who is acting in the capacity of secretary and treasurer, has opened bids for securing a complete outfit for the entire club for the coming summer. Perhaps Graniteville will be heard from later. This was a gentle nudge, or a not-so-gentle nudge, for the Graniteville ball players to get their act going. At a meeting of Court Graniteville F.of.A., Foresters of America, held last week Thursday evening, P. Henry Harrington was elected delegate to the Grand Court Convention to be held in Springfield next month. Mr. Edward Riney was elected alternate. You might recall that Henry Harrington was the contractor who built the Frost School mentioned previously, and he built many other buildings and a number of houses in Westford. And the next section is called Test. Captain J.A. Healy and the members of A.R. Schote Hose Company were out last Saturday afternoon testing the new line of hose that has recently been received here, and at the same time to get an idea of the amount of pressure they would get from the Westford Water Company. 3 different hydrants were tested, with 2 lines of hose on each hydrant. The average pressure was 27 pounds, and on a test made near the C.G. Sargent Machine Shop on Broadway with 50 feet of hose through a stream 110 feet, partly against the wind. Several of the boys got a little wetting down as a result of playing against the wind, but on the whole, the first test was very successful. Several members of Hose Company No. 1 of Westford, including Leonard W. Wheeler, Aaron Tuttle, and Howard Ferguson, were present and were much pleased with the showing made by the Graniteville boys. This company will hold a social dance in Westford Hall on Friday evening, April 24th, and it is thought there will be a large number in attendance. And the next section is Forge Village. Miss Henderson of Malden has purchased of A.L. Towle, Towle, T-O-W-L-E, the Lincoln Cottage, situated on the shore of Forge Pond, and was at the cottage last week Friday with her friends, Mrs. Field and Mrs. Baldwin, getting it in order for the 19th of April. This was a time when many of the cottages on Forge Pond that had been closed for the winter are opened up and gotten ready for the summer season. Miss Emma Cannell, who has spent the winter in Pinehurst, North Carolina, will start for home April 18th. George Stewart of Everett has been in town this week getting his cottage and boats ready for early occupancy. Also, Thomas Fisher, teacher of manual training at the Lowell High School, was inspecting the cottage of his sisters and found it was all right after the long winter. Tom Fisher was a member of the Westford Fisher family and taught at the Lowell High School. A little son, Igor Narkoska, came to Mrs. Califf Teofila Narasa last Saturday. Her husband, Philip Nawosa, died very suddenly about a month ago, March 11th. The names and dates in this sentence I just read were taken from the town report, and this is clearly one of the immigrant families from Poland or Russia, in that area anyway. And it's interesting that the surname is given 3 times and is spelled differently each time. Narnozca in the son's birth record, Narrassa for the wife's last name, and Nawosza in the husband's death record. And this was not uncommon for the town reports in these early days when they were dealing with immigrant names from Eastern Europe. Quite a number of the village people went to Ayer Tuesday evening to hear Reverend Charles L. Slatery, who preached at the Episcopal Church. Charles Lewis Slatery, born in 1867 and died in 1930, graduated from Harvard in 1891 and the Episcopal Theological School in Cambridge, Mass., and in 1894 became a priest. His father was also an Episcopal priest. At the instigation of Reverend Endicott Peabody of Groton, Reverend Slatery came to Groton School in 1894 and also became pastor of St. Andrew's Church, Ayer, in 1894 to 1896. In 1906, he published The Master of the World, a study of Christ, the first of his 25 books, which reconciled the traditional theology of the 19th century with modern scientific scholarship. The book was so highly regarded that Harvard awarded him an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree in 1907, the first honorary degree granted by the Harvard Divinity School. In December 1907, he was appointed rector of Christ Church in Springfield, Mass., where he was serving at the time of this visit to Ayer. He was elected bishop coadjutor of the Diocese of Massachusetts in 1922, and he was serving with his aging mentor, Bishop William Lawrence, and he became a bishop himself in 1927. He was a very well-known clergyman in this area 113 years ago. There was quite a fire Sunday near Gilson's Crossing, but fortunately the rain came before much damage was done. I believe Gilson's Crossing is another name for Westford Corner area, intersection of Nabnasset and Brookside roads. The Ladies' Circle met at the Mission House last week, Thursday afternoon, with a good attendance. William Burnett, James Whigham, and George Cottrell have been doing some fine work upon the grounds around the Mission House. The most notable is the taking away of the old trees, which is a decided improvement. Edward Hanley of the firm of Hanley & Company has taken advantage of the excursion to Washington, D.C., and is spending the week in New York, Philadelphia, Washington, and Atlantic City. That's the news in Westford for the week ending April 11th, 1908. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Nick Woodbury of Westford Cat for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions from the Westford Wardsman at the Westford Historical Society's website at museum.westford.org, or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.